So I'm joined here today with Sylvia Hammond. We're going to talk a little bit about your background. We're going to go through your hopes and dreams if you were elected to the legislature, and talk about how you'd like the state to tackle some of the big issues affecting us today. So just to start things off, if you could tell us a little bit about your background in the area, your history here.
Right, thank you. Thank you for inviting me here today. And also to address that question, I've lived here for 40 years. My husband and I moved up to this area shortly after he finished his master's degree, and we decided to come back to the family farm. So my husband's background has been in the Basin since he was 2 years old. But for my background, we came up about 40 years ago. And so we had our family farm, we lived here, raised our children on the farm. And then as our farming situation changed with people in the family getting older and things of that nature, then we both had backgrounds in education. And I taught for about 10 years with the Ephrata School District as a substitute teacher. And I really enjoyed being able to do that. And that's outside of the Ephrata area. I was in the Ephrata School District while I was there. And then since that time, our children have grown, we have grandchildren, and just a piece of the landscape here.
Sure. So tell me a little bit about what all goes into potato farming.
Oh man, yeah, and we were potato farmers, that's true. You rotate through, but potatoes, yeah, I always say potatoes was our bread and butter. That may sound a little silly, but you rotate through and you have other things, and sometimes you experiment with things. We tried carrot seed one time. It was just a small piece, and it was kind of for fun, but we really did raise potatoes, and it's huge. It's a huge investment. Potatoes are one of the most expensive crops to grow, and then there are just so many pieces. You have to get seed brought in, seed that's certified, and there's I don't know what's out of the norm here. There's planting, and there's maintaining, and there's harvesting, and you worry about the weather, and you worry about the bugs, and if the temperature gets too low, and you hire, we were a significant farm. We hired a number of people, especially during harvest and planting, but we had, we leased out our farm now, and so I'm looking back, trying to remember the numbers, at least 8 families that were supported full-time by Hammond Farms at the time. Mm-hmm.
And were they chipping potatoes or whole potatoes?
No, they went mostly to the different processors in our area, so not potato chips, French fries. Sure. We used to say we grew French fries, so French fries, hash browns, the little nuggety things. It's not coming to my mind. You know what I mean? They're
tater tots.
Tater tots. There you go. All of those processed ones, and so they went to the processors in Quincy and down by Othello and Moses Lake, and so that's how we didn't do. Occasionally we did a little bit of fresh pack, but that was usually if there was something going on unusual in the market.
Sure.
And we stored our potatoes and then shipped them out as needed to the processors.
What was it like raising children on a French fry farm?
Yeah. Well, I think that when people talk about the advantages of living on a farm, there really are for a family. Sometimes my kids may have felt like there was a disadvantage because they as they got into their early teens, even sometimes younger, they had to do what we call pulling petiole samples, and what that amounts to is you go out into the potato field and you pick off the second leaf down. The kids could tell you better than I could. You pick off a certain leaf, and that leaf is sent in to soil test, was who we worked with here, and they examine that, and you look at the nutrients in your plant. And so from a very young age, they walked the potato fields back and forth, pulling petiole samples every few feet as they did. So they learned to work, and that is a really valuable thing for kids. And they also learned to be a family, because they had lots of friends in town, but they were separated for them until they got their driver's licenses by about 10 miles, and my ability, whether I was busy or not, to drive them in and make arrangements and do all those things. So they really had to play with each other, and they had to learn to be a family, and so huge advantages in that lifestyle.
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
And how did you get drawn from potato farming and being a substitute teacher and a mother? How did you get drawn from that to today in politics?
Right. Yeah. No. I've always been very actively engaged in politics, as far as having an interest, paying attention. But you see what I was doing in the meantime. Your life takes you on a different path. I don't know how far back in history you want to go. I really don't. I was the first female student body president of my high school. At the time, it was kind of a big deal.
Sure.
And then I attended Brigham Young University, and they had their student government was a board with a number of vice presidents. And there was one position on that board that was specifically designated for women, but I didn't want that position. There was another position that was designated for community service, liaison with the town, with the government in the town. And that was the position I wanted to run for, and I did run for. And a woman had never filled any of those positions before as well, not because they couldn't, they just hadn't.
Sure.
And so I won that position, and I did that, and thought a lot about, maybe this was the way that I wanted to take my life. But it didn't go that way, and I don't regret that. I don't regret raising my family and living here and all of the things that I did. But then, so you keep up with that in your life, and it's a piece of who you are. And then we get to here, and then it's the opportunity is here. This is the right time in my life for me to do this. It's the right time for me in my life to contribute to the community, because I feel that that's important, and you need people to do it. People need to step up. Somebody needs to step up, and somebody needs to do this. And it's not an easy thing to do. There are definite sacrifices that are involved in putting yourself out there to the public. And again, this was just my time.
Sure. And if you were elected to the legislature, what would be some of your main priorities?
Well, the top priority is going to be education, and I don't think I would be surprised if you talked to anyone in either party that didn't say that. Mm-hmm. It has to be. It's part of the obligation of the state constitution that is our main obligation. And so we know that McCleary hung over everybody's head, and it was hard, and there was a lawsuit, and they worked really hard, and they put together what we have now. But unfortunately, whether it's the unintended consequences, whether it's sometimes you put something out there and then you discover afterwards that there need to be adjustments. I don't think there's any shame in that. I don't think we need to say, oh, this was it didn't work well. And for some school districts, I was just at the Moses Lake School Board meeting last night, and they're cutting $6.2 million of cuts they need to make in order to make sure that down the budget, down the years, they don't fall off a cliff.
Sure.
And so this in it is not just Moses Lake. If we look just at our district, I could be mistaken, but I think every single school district in the 13th legislative district, except for Quincy, is in trouble. Mm-hmm. And the only reason Quincy isn't in trouble is because the demographic of the town has changed with all the servers that have come in.
Sure.
So that they're in a unique situation, an unusual situation. But everybody else is going to struggle. It's going to be a big problem, and so that just has to be worked out. It needs to be looked at, and I believe it will be looked at. And I want to be able to participate in that, because I want to be able to be in the room and say, excuse me. And say, okay, whatever we do here, we all know we have to do something. But whatever we do here really has to work for rural districts. It has to work in District 13. And I know what that is, and I've been paying attention. And so let's make it work, and we can do that. It's going to be hard work, but we can do that.
Sure, and excuse me as well. One of the questions that I've been talking to the other contenders for the 13th legislative district, the other position, mm-hmm.
has
been addressing that exact same question. School districts across the state have seen double-digit pay raises, mm-hmm. and there is questions about how this is going to affect the budget.
Sure.
Come 2-3 years. How do we address this?
Well, the first thing I'd like to say is the double-digit pay raises for the teachers, that's been a long time coming.
Sure.
And so I think the teachers are the heart and soul of the school district. You can, and programs are important. We have programs that we really absolutely have to hang on to. But what are good are those programs if there are no teachers? And so they deserve those pay raises. That's not, if you've been in the classroom and if you've taught, and substitute teachers aren't getting a big boost from this, so I'm not talking from the substitute teacher's point of view. I'm just saying that if you have children in school, often people will say, oh, if they want to criticize teachers, they'll criticize teachers in a generic way, but most people like their child's teacher, and they're so glad that that teacher is there and shepherding their child. If you look at teachers individually, people usually love them. You know, maybe there's a few, but regardless of that, so all I'm saying is I don't want anything to come across as, oh well, those teachers, because we can't put the blame there. They needed to be caught up with things that they've been behind ever since the recession in 2008, 2009. The teachers really got slammed and things never came back. And so they've waited a long time for that. So that's why those are double digit. It's not some greedy thing going on there at all. So that being said, that should have been, and I think it was actually expected in the legislature when they were doing this. But there were deadlines, there were pressures, there were all of these things, and they put this out, I think, knowing that this was very likely the way that it would go. There were even comments, people saying, well, there's going to be some losers and there's going to be some winners. And when the whole purpose of this was to have more educational equity across the state, that didn't happen. And so you need to look, what was your goal, what did you do, and did you reach your goal? And that was the goal, and they didn't reach. And so now the thing is, what are we going to do? And the only thing that I think it gets into the weeds, and when I'm there, there'll be a lot of things that I need to be looked at. But one thing I think we can look at is looking at this not as a statewide issue, but looking at it district by district. And I think that in my understanding, at this point, I don't see that there's no reason that we can't do it that way, that we can look at things, again, we can make this analysis district by district instead of making a one-size-fits-all sort of situation that obviously didn't work.
Sure. Were there any other priorities if you were elected that, excuse me again, that you'd like to be able to touch on? Because I know we kind of diverted when we were talking about education.
Oh, yeah, sure. No, the other things that I think are very important, we need to look at access to health care, and in particular access to mental health care.
Sure.
I've talked a little bit with people involved in the hospital district and in the different hospital districts throughout our region. And I realize there's only so much that the legislature can do. And I know that they put out they put out advertisements for certain kinds of behavioral health positions that we would like to see filled, and those go unfilled. And so it's just looking into, talking to, coordinating with, what can the state do to help you? When we talk to the hospitals, the hospital districts, to the clinics, what can the state do to help you? These are just ideas at this point, but I do think there's more that we can do to coordinate with UW Medical School, WSU now having a medical school, and Yakima having the DO school, the osteopath. I hate to say that.
You know more about it than I do.
Okay, well, I am afraid I'm using the wrong term, and I apologize for that. But it's, and I think we need to look at those schools and be doing more coordinating there. We need to look at incentivizing getting these people here. There are some rural rotations that are going on, and a doctor will often come back to an area where they've had a rotation. So there are things that we can do with incentives, but we need to be paying attention. And with many of these issues, my philosophy on this is, I don't want to be a legislator that just thinks in terms of the state. I really am focused on this district, and I want to cooperate with every single entity in the district, and so that means the cities, the district, the port district, and the hospital district, and the counties, and you name it.
Sure.
That's where the ideas are, because that's where the need is. They know what they need, and where I can help out as a legislator, then that's what I want to do.
Sure.
So help, and let me just put one more in there for
Sure.
Moses Lake especially. When we talk about infrastructure, that becomes a word. Oh, infrastructure. Everybody uses that word. Well, what does that mean if you get specific? And there are things with roads, maintaining what we've got, adding. But the one thing that I really want to focus on is on the Odessa Aquifer.
Sure.
We know that that's there, and I'm not the first, by far, the first person to talk about this. There's been work going on for a long time, and there may be some really good solutions that are just around the corner. And so the fear is that when water dries, when water's gone, it's gone. And this idea that water is an infinite resource, we know isn't true. And so we need to get some legs behind what's going on there and get some action taken, because we can't say, oh, we wished we'd have done that 10 years ago when there's no water. So that's also a big one that especially is important for the Moses Lake area.
And you're referring to drawing water instead from Lake Roosevelt, correct? From behind the Cooley Dam instead of the Odessa, or is there another suggestion?
No, the other suggestion is finishing up the project, the Columbia Basin Irrigation Project. That we have the canals coming down, and what was promised there was never fulfilled, because the completion of that project is one of the possibilities that's there. Very expensive. The federal government would have to be on board, but that's one of the options that's there, because we have two competing issues here. We have irrigation for farms, which we know the irrigators and the farms are the economic driver of the area, and then we have the municipalities, and the municipalities need the water as well. And so what are we going to do? And worrying about it, and the one being angry at the other and saying, oh, well, I don't care if you don't have water, and I don't care if you don't have water. What does that do? And so the idea is that there are suggestions out there. There are things that have been studied and looked at and worked on, and we just need, like I said, we need to put some legs on those things and get past the study phase and into the action phase.
Sure. Moving on to some of the pressing issues, we've already touched on one that I was going to go to because we were already there.
Yeah.
But diverting back a little bit, employment figures for the Columbia Basin have been swinging steadily but slowly upwards, slower than the rest of the state. We're curious what the state legislature, what the state should be doing to help promote job growth in the region.
Right. I think that what some of the things that are really interesting to look at are, we do need to bring in more industry. We are an agricultural base, but
Sure.
to have more industry, and to then also we need to attract business. And if you talk about Moses Lake, one of the things is the port that we need
Sure.
to look at. We need to attract businesses that can hire a lot of people with skills going from very basic entry-level skills all the way up to very high technical skills. We run into serious problems when we have things like REC that may or may not be closing down. We'll hope that things can work out and that can come back up. But, not, I am sorry, we both have the same cold, I guess. Apparently so. Not everybody is going to be a farmer.
Sure.
And we need to, and so we need to bring in industry and go from there. We need to be smart about how we do that. But, and the state can help with that. They can help incentivize that. It can help support, and I use the Moses Lake Port District because we're sitting here in Moses Lake,
Sure. But
there are districts, port districts throughout, and just the communities themselves, the chambers that are working on this. The legislature, I'm sorry, this is in my mind, we're a support for that.
Sure.
These are the people on the ground, again, do the work, because that's their thing. But the legislature has to be a support, and people get concerned in our area that on the east side that we're ignored.
Sure.
And so the idea of sending someone such as myself over there is to have someone who will say, don't ignore us. We're here, pay attention, and strategically speaking, that I'm a Democrat, and we and I know that we will have a Democratic governor. We will likely have a Democratic, not only majority, but super majority. And so we have to look at this and say, how strong will the 13th legislative district be if we can send over a Democrat who will be in the room where the decisions are made? And when something comes up that does not work in an urban, or that only works in an urban area and not in a rural area, you've got someone in the room with me to say, okay guys, hold up. This does not work in my district. Pay attention. We're here. Let's make this work. And not the, I will never do anything for you because you will never do anything for me. Not that. Okay, let's make this work together so that you have the things that you need to thrive in an urban area, but we have what we need to have in a rural area. We've chosen this lifestyle. This is where we live, and people need to know we're here.
Moving on to another issue. Student mental health has been a really big issue across the state over the last couple of years. In our region, we have seen a string of student suicides, most recently with 11 and 13-year-old girls from our local middle schools. What can the state do? What should the state be doing to help stop that? To help these kids?
Yeah. On the state level, I know that I know Senator Warnick is looking at some changes in what the legal ages are for parents to intervene with their kids in mental health. I have not looked into that enough to know. I mean, but I can certainly see that there could be some advantages there. But again, you don't want to speak out of turn on something you only know a little bit about. And so that, but part of this issue is access to mental health care. I have a friend who had a child that was struggling, and they had tried to get health care in the area, behavioral health care, mental health care in the area, and they were told, well, it'll take about 6 weeks for us to get anyone in. And so if you have a child in crisis, 6 weeks does not cut it. And so this is where this access to health care comes in, and where we can have, hopefully, the state legislature putting out some incentives in rural areas to encourage people to come here, those specialists that we need to come here. Right now, I've heard that if a person comes in mental health crisis and the physician feels that they cannot release them, they have to send them to Spokane, to the emergency room in Spokane, and they sit in a hold. I mean, it's a mess. So we all know it's a mess. Exactly what the solution is, then that becomes a lot of work to find that. But I do think incentivizing and increasing the amount of mental health, helping the school districts with funding for issues that we can get counselors in the schools. And by counselors in the schools, there's a difference between the counselor that helps you set up your class schedule and your path forward to college, and that's valuable. That's not a mental health counselor in the school. Those are two different jobs, and those counselors, unfortunately, sometimes get stuck with both jobs, and they shouldn't.
Sure.
So actual mental health counselors in the schools would be something that we would also need to look at. And then just continuing all of the efforts to be supportive with young people with activities and with education about what happens on social media with bullying.
Sure.
That's tough.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Sylvia, it has been an absolute pleasure talking with you today. Is there anything you'd like to add?
I should have. I guess the thing that I would like to add, is that this race has taken a very odd turn. And so, I have reached out to people. I've tried to explain to people that I'm a moderate Democrat, and that my one goal, my overarching goal over all of these different issues that we've talked about, is to represent the area that is my home. And that they, if they speak with me, if I meet them, that they can feel that that is my plan. I don't have some other agenda that has been perhaps hoisted on me by others. Those things aren't true. So my agenda is to represent this district with a full heart. Now I'm in a situation of I don't even have a candidate really to have a comparison by. So Mr. Manmuller has said if I'm elected, I won't serve. But he hasn't suspended his campaign, and he hasn't, there's no guarantee of that. That's a comment, that's not a contract. We don't know what will happen there. He could say, I changed my mind, and I'm going to serve, and people would not have wanted that. There's a process where you vote for unknown Republican. Who is that? And that to me, when I go door to door and I knock on people's doors, one of the first things they tell me is politics is ugly. I don't like the games. I don't like the maneuvering. And that is 100% what we're looking at right now, is games and maneuvering by party. It was never meant that we would have a ballot that would say, this party, no candidate. It was meant to have candidates. People like you and I, we can look each other in the eye, we can have a conversation, you can see how you feel about me. We have candidates.
Sure.
And so now we have this unknown candidate that puts the voter, I see how a voter could say, oh, now I get to vote for exactly who I want. Because in their mind, they can invent a candidate that is exactly who they want, that agrees with everything they say, that has the background that they think is important, and all the things. A mythical unicorn candidate is who is available to vote for. Well, that's just, it doesn't, this is all within the law, but it's political maneuvering, and it sure doesn't feel like democracy. And so I guess I encourage voters, obviously I encourage voters to vote for me. But I encourage them now even more than ever. They can trust that I'll be a reliable representative for this district because of my background. And voting for an unknown is really, I think the voters in this area are thoughtful voters, and I can't imagine they would be happy with that,
Sure.
with that kind of a vote.
It has been a pleasure talking
Yeah,
with you,
thank
Sylvia.
you very much.
Thank
It's
you.
nice to see you again.